Hello and welcome to another episode of Spar Talk. Today I'm joined by Comrade Vincent to discuss all things Britain. Hello, Comrade.
Hello.
How are you?
Not too bad. How are you?
All right.
It's been a tough week with the left in Britain.
Well,
I'm not gonna lie.
exactly. We really are talking about all things Britain. So lots has been happening, not good things. And I think most of our listeners will definitely be aware of the absolutely massive right-wing demonstration, the Tommy Robinson demonstration that took place on 13 September, this past Saturday, and the anti-racist, anti-right-wing left counter demonstration absolutely paled in size. Today, we have kind of a brewing disaster in this new party that was announced by Jeremy Corbyn and Sultana. We've spoken about it in a previous episode, but that party, which everybody was really excited about on the left, that seems to be on the verge of a split. And we're calling this episode 6 Days Which Shook the Left in Britain. And this is your suggestion. So why don't you start by explaining to our listeners what's behind this name?
It's just been a tough few days if you're leftist in Britain. So yeah, first of all, Saturday, massive right-wing demonstration, against immigration. We want our country back, etc., organized by this guy, Tommy Robinson. And the left was totally outnumbered, but completely. The police says that there was 150,000 right-wingers, but it's obvious that there was way more, close to 1 million, I think. And the left was, 10,000? The demonstration of the left was also very liberal, very wishy-washy, very tepid, while on the other side, the right was really emboldened, really full of confidence, to the point where the demo ended up being encircled and kettled, and to the point where the police had to escort them. So that was sad.
The anti-racist demonstration.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, they got basically surrounded by the right-wing demonstration. I mean, I think just to give a bit of a sense, this was like a sea of British flags, the Union Jack, the St. George's cross, the English flag, and so on. I see that. And really, I think it's kind of funny, there was lots of aerial footage of the demonstrations. And we'll talk. Okay, listen, there's so much to talk about, but I'm just going to, since I've gotten into it, let's just talk about the numbers to give our listeners a bit of a sense who maybe aren't so familiar. You saw lots of aerial footage of this demonstration. And I think there's a deliberate sort of effort to say, oh, well, it was really large, but about 100, 110, 50,000, which, I think is quite an understatement.
Yes.
And as you said, the left, 10, 15, okay, let's even be generous. Let's say 20. But I think what I've noticed is a lot of progressives and leftists are like, oh yeah, but it was more, or don't worry, we have big Palestine demonstrations too, or whatever. But it's let's just why, what is so hard to admit about what happened, you guys were a tiny demonstration. I mean, by the way, we were there, we were there. We marched in a contingent. We'll get to that too. But it was a really small demonstration against a huge right-wing demonstration. And, okay, fine. Let's not say 1 million. Let's say 500,000, 300,000. The point remains that it was magnitudes bigger than the left. And the left needs to answer why. It needs to think about why. So I guess maybe let's just talk about I don't know. How do you think, how do we make sense of what's happening in Britain at the moment to our listeners? Because also we've just put out a new issue of Workers' Hammer. That's the paper of our British section. And, we talk about what's happening in the country. You have an article that you wrote called Stormer Disaster, really laying out, things in this country are not in a good position. I mean, the government is in a crisis. There just seems to be one sacking or firing or resignation after another. The latest is this Epstein scandal. And, the government's not doing well. The economy's doing terribly. The right is growing. And the left is but we didn't organize enough. And I think this is a real wake up call. So I don't know. Well, how would you start explaining?
Well, let's just briefly, like you said, the British economy is in total shambles. There's no growth. There's total stagnation. Living standards are falling. You have a Labour government with Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who is completely hated, completely discredited. I think he's at 7% approval or something like that. And you have the one oppositional force to this government is the growing right wing with Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, and also a movement by Tommy Robinson, who's kind of to the right of Reform UK, really, a sort of a mass plebeian movement in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And this demonstration has been building for months on the right, and it really comes on the backdrop of a summer during which there was constant demonstration around immigration. You have a country that is rotting. There's increasing numbers of immigration, or there's, hundreds of thousands of people, but particularly there are illegal immigrants coming into small boats, which is kind of the big obsession of the right here.
Mm-hmm.
However, the government takes these illegal immigrants and sends them into these very poor town in the north where everything is, a lot of poverty, towns run down that have been deindustrialized, and places them in hotels. And there was even also certain migrants which did commit crime. So you have this sort of explosive cocktail where obviously the people in the town are angry about their one hotel being taken over by migrant. And then you have right-wing people who seized on this to organize demonstration against this. Then you have counter-demonstration by the left who arrive in these small towns from big cities and they scream, refugees are welcome here, you're racist, you're racist. And you sort of have this escalating tension. And I think the demo on 13 September was really the sort of the culmination of all of this. And we saw, I believe, the real balance of forces in society at the moment, which political movement is really growing. And the left has been, I think, a lot of in denial about this balance of forces. And you're right to point out that even after the demonstration on 13 September, although it was clear for every leftist that this wasn't good, many published statements like this must be a wake-up call.
Yeah. Even the organizers of the march did.
Yeah, the organizer of the march said it's a wake-up call. But then they said, oh, we just need to do more of the same. And a lot of leftists are like, oh, try to turn this into a fluke, Well, it was one demo where they were quite well organized. We weren't. But, we have big Palestine march. So, nothing to worry about. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, what this demo, I think, showed was really a sort of a deep movement that's been going on for years in Britain, which has really been brought into the open and been brought as an organized force, which is really... the right wing is really positioning itself as the sole alternative to this liberal status quo. The right wing has growing followers among working class people. Because on that demo, it wasn't true that it was only fascist and racist. There was, but there was also the majority was just working class people, honestly, who are fed up with everything. Probably, adopting these prejudices, but just really fed up. Ex-labor voters often.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, I mean, there's a lot in what you said that I want to start picking apart and picking up. I mean, I think one is a question of what was the nature of this demo. A lot of people are calling it just fascist, and many people from that side, from the Tommy Robinson side, said they object to being called far right because they're like, well, I'm just here protesting the state of the country and I don't like it. So there's quite a spectrum of, I think, views that ended up being represented by this demonstration. In our view, anyways, I think the left would really go hysterical if they heard this. Yeah. But I think they got sort of lumped together into this demonstration because, as you said, that really there's no other credible voice that stands really distinct as being anti-establishment, like against the status quo. Yeah. That has really driven this country into the ground even more. But I want to start, let's rewind a little bit. You mentioned what breeds this sort of polarization, right? You have the immigration question is huge. And, the way the imperialists deal with the refugee question, as you said, they house them in really devastated communities that have been deindustrialized, that are totally in ruins themselves, where white British people, there'll be generations who haven't worked, because there's no jobs, there's no basic infrastructure for those communities. And then what happens is that you have the governments who are like, oh, well, okay, well, we're just going to go and plop, 50 refugees into this hotel. But it's much more than just hotels, right? It's that when you have this state of desperation in communities in much of the country, then the migrants end up becoming this force of attraction that people come to see as, oh, those guys are the problem. Look, they're living free and the government and tax dollars tax pounds. And they're the problem, you know? And I think this is something that maybe that isn't obviously to those people, but I think this is something that's also absolutely denied by many on the left. Like, what exactly is fueling this polarization? What is wrong with the whole immigration question as it's posed, not just in Britain, we see this in other countries in the West as well. So I think if you how do you make sense of the immigration question as a communist?
Well, in general, as communists, we are We're obviously not against immigration. Obviously, we are for the defense of immigrants and against deportation. But the other thing is that, particularly for the case of Britain, the country is rotting, and bringing hundreds of thousands of immigrants in a country that is rotting has nothing progressive about it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the immigration, how it's posed, maybe we can take a bit like the two sides. I think
Mm-hmm.
on the right, you've described quite well some of the frustration that people have in these towns. And obviously, these are legitimate frustration. When you're run downtown where you can't have any services, now has to care for refugees on top of that. And when you can't put the heating on, and you have refugees that do have heating and do see doctors, it does create a frustration. It creates the impression to people that the government cares more for immigrants than for them.
Mm-hmm.
However, these frustrations are obviously used by right-wing, racist, and even fascist demagogues who sort of able to use this obvious anger to their purpose, to blame refugees, to blame immigrants, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem on the left then, because it's necessary to combat these, racist and fascist demagogue that do use that legitimate anger. But the problem on the left is that the strategy to combat this for years now has been basically to call anybody that has question or frustration about immigration a racist or a fascist. Anyone that goes to these demos is a racist. And what this has done is really to push the working class further into the right as the only people who speak to their anger. Like what these people that go to the Tommy Robinson demos hate with the left is really that they think that their anger is just, racism, and you have to, go away, and we have to crush you, and that's it. And that's really been the sort of poisonous polarization that's been happening. And I would add to this too that the demonstration against the right are often organized in collaboration with the left wing of the Labour Party, who is in government. The Labour Party is in government. The trade unions, who all support the Labour Party. So at the demo this Saturday, the speakers were Labour Party MPs, John McDonnell, Diane Abbott, who literally support the government, and trade union leaders who fund the government. And then on the other side, Tommy Robinson, for example, in his speech, he said, this is the beginning of a revolution against the entire establishment and, militant. And so in the eyes of many workers, who is speaking for the working people who are completely live in destroyed towns? Who are speaking for their frustration? It's the right. And I think this demo really showed this quite powerfully, that it isn't the left.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answer about how do you approach immigration, but at least that's how the polarizations are. And the task of communists, really, what we fought in this demo was really for a split with the liberal politics of the movement. Mm-hmm. And what we fight in the right when we have the opportunity is to try to detach these workers who are legitimately angry from these, fascist and racist elements, obviously, to provide a class solution to their problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to push a little bit on the whole question of the liberal politics of the anti-racist left, because I think that's one of the key questions that the left needs to actually deal with in order to snap out of this absolute pathetic, lame nothingness, because that is the dominant sort of view on the left, that the way to fight racism is to go to, Calais, go to God knows where, and say refugees are welcome here. But there's a thing you mentioned which I think is important to highlight, which is that oftentimes the anti-racist demonstrations are small groups of people, usually from large metropolitan areas, who tend to be more liberal and more progressive. So you have a bunch of outsiders who descend onto small towns where there's this really nasty polarization. And then they go there and they're like, you guys are scumbag racists. Refugees are welcome here. And this, I think because this is a dominant strategy so far, I think it's worth explaining why this is so polarizing. The fact that these are not these are not members from the community themselves who are rising up to take an anti-racist stand. It's outsiders who are coming in. I think that's actually unhelpful. I'm not saying it's per se unprincipled or something. Of course we would go from out of town to go protest in other places, but I think it's more the strategy. Right. I wonder if you could comment on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The demos are totally liberals. They're liberal in the sense that they appeal to morality and moralism, and they don't try to appeal to class interest against the government, but they try to appeal to whatever ideas you have in your head. So the slogan, refugees are welcome here, the problem in this slogan, it's not that we're against welcoming refugees, but it's a slogan that is directed not at the government, which has created this mess, but at the people who don't really like that their town has been, one hotel in their town has been seized for migrants. Like, and whatever prejudice they might have had, this has to be combated. But this slogan really says what people in these towns hear with the slogan is, we are with the government, you are racists for
Yeah.
being angry.
Yeah.
And that's how liberalism, I think, is a good example, how liberalism, by relying on morals and ideas, really ends up dividing the working class and isolating the left right now in Britain. That's what's happening. There's a massive gap right now in Britain between the working class and the left and that's been absolutely poisonous. It's been happening for years.
Yeah. I think the one last thing on the point of refugees, I think the one thing that you really don't see, or maybe I'm wrong, but the perspective, like, I don't think refugees themselves really are keen on being holed up in these horrible places where they can't work.
They want to work.
They can't work. They have no rights. They can't even the point is they're not integrated into society. So they're just living in limbo in these communities that are far away, that are super isolated. Yeah. And this is not what it means to, quote, welcome refugees here. I'm sorry, but I don't think refugees are like, let me cross the channel and go to Britain so I can live in a damp hotel where there's horrible racists outside my window who want to light the hotel on fire. I think the left is it's so obsessed with this moral appeals on we're anti-racist, and actually doesn't try and understand actually, how do you fight for refugees? You have to integrate them. Yes, once they're here, we are absolutely against their deportations. We fight for their rights, but you have to integrate them into the society. And to do that, you have to go against the government, because this is a government policy that totally isolates them, that totally marginalizes them in society. And that actually is the whole framework within which they become the sort of target of this anger and frustration by the right wing.
Yeah.
And I think that's completely missing. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, but I'd just add to this already complex picture, like in Epping, where there was a lot of these demos. It's a town not too far from London. One of the refugee was found guilty of sexual harassment on a teenager. So it's perfect, horrible picture. And it's and it flows a bit from this, poverty, oppression, and the fact that these people are completely separated from society, have nothing to do. And also for the liberals who are like, oh, refugees, whatever, a lot of these people do go through pretty traumatic experience that also mess with their mind sometimes. So anyway, so you have this entire explosive cocktail, and really the only way you can cut through all of this is really through appealing to the class interest, the plight of immigrants, the plight of white workers, fight for jobs for both of them in these communities against the government. That's how you can unite all these people. But the liberals really come in there with a program totally alien to this and end up really dividing everyone, consolidating these people around the right wing, and really making the entire left look like, honestly, defenders of the status quo.
Yeah. No, I think that's really well said in terms of just painting this picture of, as you mentioned, the gap that exists between the left and the working class. Now, I know this point is very controversial. We say this as a stated fact, as an accomplished fact, but this is actually something that there's a lot of disagreements on. A lot of people on the left and in the labor movement will disagree with this.
Yeah.
And they cite all kinds of things like, oh, look at trade union numbers. So many millions, are still members of the trade unions. Well, look at how big the Palestine demonstrations are, and this and that and the other thing. So what do you think is, I guess let's start moving to the left a little bit. What do you think is this problem in just facing this reality?
Well, if I can just step back a bit and then I'll get to the left, just a bit of history for our listeners. This gap between the working class and the left has been in the making for many, many years now. And we're really seeing it, I think, explode out in the open. But if you go back all the way to Tony Blair in the late 90s, early 2000s, Tony Blair really tried to transform the Labour Party from a, reformist working class party, like a really socially liberal party, pro-European Union, opened the door for a lot of immigration, but also privatization together with social values, and really pushed increasing amount of working class people sort of out of the Labour Party. And fast forward to the Corbyn era, when Jeremy Corbyn, left-wing leader, took the leadership of the party in 2016, you had this huge polarization in the country, in Britain, around Brexit, in or out of the European Union. And again, this polarization really crystallized itself, where working class town in the north of the country were really against the AU, pro-Brexit, and really middle-class liberal element were totally for the AU. And a lot of the left, which is based increasingly in middle-class element, it's in majority voted for Remain, voted for the AU. You have this schism, and this schism was really exposed in 2019 when Corbyn lost the election against Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson had a simple slogan. He was like, get Brexit done. And Corbyn was for a second referendum. And he won a lot of working class voters away from Labour based on this. And, fast forward a bit, you had the strike wave in 2022-23, a massive explosion of working class struggle since the 80s, really, which was completely betrayed by the union leaders who were beholden to Labour, really created a lot of demoralization. Workers didn't win anything despite struggle, and really contributed to said demoralization. And in parallel to all of this, the right is growing all the time as the only ones who speak for working class people. So you have this growing gap, and really the cause for it is the left's embrace of liberal politics, liberalism, which has been the dominant ideology of the ruling class up until very recently. This is where it starts to change.
Yeah. Speaking just on the recent strike wave, I think, again, there's disagreements on that question too. We say that, oh, well, it was betrayed and the workers won nothing. And the left, their main motto usually is, oh, well, they won not as much as they could have, but they still won lots of things. It was a huge step forward. Maybe not the step forward that we need, but still, it was a step forward. And they really attack anybody who calls us a defeat as being, cynics or defeatists or whatever. And I think I have one question for anybody who's listening who really disagrees with this. Like, if there was a really successful working class upsurge, in 2022, 2023, if there was huge working class power that actually advanced the interests of the working class, that won real substantial gains, that beat back the government, that got rid of the Tories, for example, would you really think that the right would be so emboldened right now? If the unions came out so strong, don't you think the right wing would be a little bit afraid of working class power? The answer is obviously not, because you know what? A lot of workers are on the wrong side. They're on Tommy Robinson's side. So I feel like that's that. I would really like it if the left could answer that question, honestly, for me personally. But that it raises a question, why?
I think that's a very good question. That's very, that's obvious. Obviously, we fought like hell to make this strike wave successful. But really, in order to make it successful, you had to go against the leaders who didn't want it to confront the government. And there's a real correlation between the defeat of this strike wave and the shift to the right in the country. Yes, it was in the making, but that really accelerated it. And it really put the whole working class in a quite terrible position when the Starmer government came in.
Yeah, I mean, you've kind of touched on this already, but before we go to the leaders of the workers' movement and the left in general, I want to just talk a little bit more about the Tommy Robinson demonstration. So for our listeners who don't know, Vincent is the editor of Workers' Hammer. We have a YouTube account on Workers' Hammer. And after the demonstration, you and Comrade Tom did a debrief video of what went down at this demonstration. We wanted to get out a quick sort of reaction and analysis and really, call it what it is, And I wonder if you could comment a little bit, because I think the reaction to that video is quite interesting. So I wonder if you want to just give some punchlines of what happened.
Yeah. Well, it was very funny because we made that reaction video together with a statement. You can go, maybe you can put it in the show notes. It was directed at the left, and our thing was like, this was a disaster for the left. We need to wake up.
That was a headline.
Yeah, exactly.
13 September, London, a disaster for the left.
Yeah, we need to wake up, and the problem has been liberal politics pushing workers towards the right, and that needs to stop. So that's sort of our message. But turns out the video is pretty much ignored by the left, but who watches it is all the people who are on the other side. Yeah. The side of Tommy Robinson. And it kind of goes viral on Twitter on some parts, because the right is like, oh my God, even the left admits they're defeated.
I know.
Yeah. So we get a lot of comments that are very, anti-communist and racist, the usual sort of stuff like that. But there was a sizable number of comments of people who were quite happy about that video, who thought it was quite useful, and thought that, although they might disagree with many things and they're coming from different perspectives, they think we have many points and do agree with a lot of our analysis. You had a lot of people who describe how they're working class people who turned their back on the left after Tony Blair, or recently because of its liberal content. They used to be Labour voter. They used to be, sort of social democrat workers. There's a strong tradition historically in Britain of pro-socialism among the working class, but it really turned their back on this because of what we were explaining. So I think it was touching a certain chord in certain segment of this layer, the sort of the right wing, quote unquote. They don't like it when they're called right wing, but
yeah. I found that quite interesting. I wonder if you could comment a little bit on that, because there was listen, I haven't watched this in a couple of days, but I know last I did, there was about 400 comments on this video. And again, majority of them, not very pleasant. They're like, oh, ha, 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 the left even admits it, you guys suck. But the thoughtful.
But even then, a lot of the right wingers were like, "Oh, I don't like the left, but I think this is pretty decent from them." And honesty to you, like,
oh wow, leftists who actually I don't hate, and maybe we can actually have a conversation or whatever. But I wonder if you could comment, there were people, and even in some of the clips that were played on the on the news and BBC or whatever, you saw like just a tiny expression that people really objected. Some people objected to being called far right.
Yeah.
What is that? Because that's a bit strange to me. I mean, at first I hear it, I'm like, oh wait, what are you talking about? And you're listening to Tommy. I mean, for those who don't know, Tommy Robinson, like really nasty character, EDL associated historically and so on. But there's some other really nasty personalities there. There's Eric Zemmour. Is that the name?
Yeah, Eric Zemmour.
Right. Like it's like the far right of all of Europe.
Yeah.
Plus Elon Musk, he did a Zoom call, and it's just like it was a nasty combination of people. But then you got people who are like, "Hey, I'm not far right." So it's like, how do I make sense of this? What are you trying to say?
Yeah. Well, I think you kind of have to make sometimes a certain distinction between a lot of the people that were there and those on the stage. Of course, you have people in that demo that are racist, that are fascist, people who were there to beat up the left, really, and immigrants. So that's quite sinister. But you had also a mass of people who were just there because they were fed up and they don't want to be called, like, far right is basically what the BBC call these demonstrations. Like the mainstream media and whatever, sort of say, these are extremists, deranged people, racist, essentially. And that's basically been the strategy of the left. How do you combat these demos? You just yell racist and fascist at them. And they're sort of fed up at it. And for some, I can understand, you're sort of fed up to being called racist just for saying like the status quo suck and I'm angry at it. Now, there's always a bit of a, they emphasize as well that this isn't the racist demo. There were black people, there were other minorities, which is true, by the way. It wasn't only white.
Yeah. That's true.
I mean, a bit more than token, I would say. I mean, a minority, so? But I think a little more. Yeah, like I think there was some black, British, Caribbean. There were certain minority groups. There were some Indians.
Definitely a handful of Indians. Yes, of course.
There were some Indians.
Making the community proud.
Yeah. Obviously, this has nothing to do with Islam in India, this whole situation. But anyway, so they say that. But at the same time, they know themselves that there are a lot of dubious character in this demonstration. Mm-hmm. So why is that important? It's important because the whole left is like fascist, fascist, fascist. And the Socialist Workers' Party, the one who organized the counter demonstration, really doubled down even after the demo. Any legitimate concern on immigration is racism. All these people, it's racist. And it's really stupid because if you want to beat the right, you have to drive like a class wedge in this whole mass, separate those working people who are angry, are right to be angry, who are just, being channeled in this direction, separate them away from the openly fascist, racist, and people who are there ready for.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think I'm thinking of leftists who might be listening. I think they'll probably have burst into flames by now listening to this. I don't know how much of that demonstration, how much of
But look, to leftists, to leftists who might be listening quickly, like if you're bursting into flame or you don't like what I'm saying, like when we say this is a wake-up call, it is a wake-up call. It isn't like, oh, let's just continue to do what we were doing for years. No, what the left has been doing for years has created this. So things have to change, we have to re-question the whole setup.
Yeah.
of these demonstration.
Yeah, for sure. The one point I did want to make about what you said, I don't know what the percentage or proportion of that demonstration was like really just disgruntled workers who didn't really have shitty views on like, Islam or minorities or whatever. But of course that trend was there. But to what extent, how big was it or not? I don't know. But
I don't know.
I do have to say, I think that speaking as a minority myself, I'm going to just pull out my identity politics card for a second. Like, it is a scary situation.
Of
Like,
course.
on Saturday, that was not a good time to be in central London. Like, it was a scary time. You took the tube, I went down to central London, got on the tube, like so many people, and you constantly have to be kind of careful now. Well, that day you did anyways. I don't know how things will kind of evolve, but like it was not a comfortable day to be a minority, I think, in central London. And this, of course, we're making these points about immigration and how the left sucks, and those are all true things. But I think there's also the point about where the minorities are at. And I want to talk about the minorities for a second here, because I think it really says something that the left-wing demonstration against Tommy Robinson did not have a sizable minority presence. And that itself should be a reflection of the fact that the left's perspective is not working, and that their politics actually, the whole slogans of, refugees welcome here and whatever, like that actually itself is harmful to advancing the defense of minorities. Yeah. And I think that's a point that actually isn't spoken about enough. And we've made this point in our press multiple times in the recent issues of the paper. And I wonder if you could actually speak to that, how liberalism actually is counterproductive to defending those it claims to defend.
Well, I think probably many minorities knew what some of us going to the demo maybe didn't really realize, that these people were not going to protect the demonstration, right? The demonstration was attacked, Like, that's the thing. The demo is like liberal. It's like a love fest. It's like NGOs and, love, not hate, blah, blah, blah.
One of the clips that that was circulated a lot when these guys were kettled is people dancing.
Yeah.
Like, so they're kettled, there's like hundreds of thousands of like Tommy Robinson supporters kettling these people. And then you have like 20 people just like dancing as a sign of protest. And it's like peace, love, and kumbaya. Yeah. And honestly, I was raging. Watching this, I was so angry. Like now, like these people are like, come on. There's fascists on the other side, There were parts in that demonstration where the left-wing demonstration was marching and there were like provocateurs on the side, And then the answer of these people is to dance. Like, I'm sorry, as a minority, I don't have a lot of trust that these people can come and defend me if if I'm about to get punched in the face.
I think
that's just...
that was quite pathetic. But I think there was a moment where also people were scared, like where, it was scary. But the thing is I think these liberal wishy-washy slogan, peace and love, I don't think it necessarily attract much minorities. And I think minorities know that, if there's going to be a big right-wing demo, we better be ready on our side, or else, let's stay away. And you're absolutely right. The demo was quite white on the protest side. And this is London, by the way, which is quite an indictment. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So let's come to the left, the answer to this. How do we go forward, right? Like, this is a really bad state. Let's come back to the 6 days which shook the left in Britain. So that was Saturday.
Yeah.
And we're on the 6th day. No, we're talking today. So tell us what else is happening that's shook the left in Britain, because that's also a really important part to really understanding the state, the absolutely just pathetic, horrible state of this country.
Well, obviously there's a big vacuum on the left of the Starmer government. Starmer is so much to the right. And so this party by ex-Labour MP Mansa Sultana, who quit the party, and Jeremy Corbyn, who's been expelled from Labour, during the summer they launched, we're going to do this party. This had been like years of rumor. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But then, they were going to do it. It was going to be called Your Party. Whatever, that's just the name they picked temporarily. And since the summer, nothing had really moved. Nothing, they launched it, they say, we're going to do this, but then nothing had moved. And what you only had in the media was blimps of factional struggle. Jeremy Corbyn versus Mansa Sultana fighting. Over what? We don't really know. but it was over who controls, I think, the money,
Mm-hmm.
the datas, the lists,
Yeah.
really, really infighting. This sort of bubble fighting has been growing and growing, including sometimes with like, little blimps of politics here or there. Zara
Yeah.
Sultana criticizing Corbyn when he was leader of the Labour Party, Corbyn sort of rebuking her. And you sort of had this, all of this happens in secret and people get quite frustrated. And what happened today, which was quite like absolutely breathtaking, was that it came out this morning. All the people who signed up to that party received an email saying, we're launching our membership, sign up, £5 a month, let's go. And a few hours later, Corbyn comes out saying, you receive an email that was fraudulent. We're in contact with the authorities. Do not respond to it. Do not sign up there. It turns out Zara Sultana just launched her own membership in the name of this entire party. And Jeremy Corbyn and his allies have just rebuked her, essentially calling her like a fraud and threatening legal action. And Zara Sultana saying she's been stuck with a sexist boys club all that time. Anyway, a huge, sorry for the vulgar word, but shit show, really. There's no other word to describe it. It's totally humiliating. The whole left looks, it looks like a caricature of the left. The party it doesn't even exist. And it's already splitting right now. And splitting on what line? Like nothing clear over money and who controls what. The reason why this is important, maybe from outside it doesn't sound very important, but this party, there was 800,000 people who signed up for it. There's a lot of hope on the left that like things are not doing too good. We really need something that we can call our own party or something.
It's really a hallelujah moment for the left and like, the labor diaspora who's been expelled or, sidelined by Starmer and so on.
Yeah.
And a lot of the, I think a lot of the Palestine movement as well. But I think the way it's played out, it's really, it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
I have to say though, it's not very surprising. I think, sometimes I'm like, oh my God, it gets this bad. But fundamentally, it's not that surprising, I think. Maybe you agree or disagree. But, I think this party wasn't going to be like this healthy, aha, we have clear politics. Let's go get the show on the road.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we can get into a little bit of this. So as we're recording this, we're putting out a leaflet on this sort of split. The Guardian, the mainstream media is talking about it, like, oh, your party and the Verge are split. So this is really
like red meat for them. It's like, oh my God, the party is splitting before it even exists.
It's really not a good look for these guys. I think the thing is we can say what we want about the politics of these guys, which we absolutely don't agree with. But if this thing crashes and burns before it's even had a chance to get off the ground, that itself will be such a blow to the working class movement. And it will actually accelerate the rightward shift we're seeing in Britain, I think. And I think that's why it's really funny to watch these, like, maybe I shouldn't say that, but like, to watch this infighting happen on like such pathetic issues, somewhat comical, but at the same time, it's actually a really serious thing.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about, we wrote, as I mentioned earlier, we just put out an issue of the paper. We actually addressed this whole question of why is there so much cliquiness and bureaucratism going on in this party? Because, Corbyn and Sultana, they're old allies. She really is kind of somebody who I think grew under his wing. And to have, for things to have gotten this bad is not super clear. Like, why are there these cliques? What's behind this infighting and how do we make sense of it? Because I think it's not very obvious. And two, obviously it can lead to demoralization, but two, I think the left is not clear how to deal with it, because what they're saying is like, hey, stop fighting, just be revolutionaries.
Be democratic.
Or be democratic, So they have just like organizational solutions. Okay, we'll be more transparent so you guys don't fight, so we can hold you accountable, blah, blah, blah. But I think that really doesn't address the problem, let alone answer the question.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you can get into a little bit about like bureaucratism in your party and what is it?
Because at first that's what the left, I think, cannot explain. Because at first this whole fight looks like a fight of ego, I want the money, he wants the money, I want to lead, I want to lead. And of course there's a lot of this, but there's something a bit deeper behind this. You have to remember, like, the whole way they launched the party, this party has been in the works for years. Corbyn is like dragging his feet. Even Zara Sultana, she was in Labour under Starmer. She elected him. Like, they really dragged their feet for this. And the reason why they're launching it is not because they're, they have a clear vision about the coming period in Britain. It's really the pressure, like Stop the Right, the pressure of the Palestine movement that sort of forced them to this. And like they're trying to launch this party with like the politics of yesterday a little bit. Both Corbyn and Sultana, each in their own way, maybe a bit with variation, but they're all trying to like launch this party in a very polarized period of great shocks on the basis of like sort of liberal platitudes of like peace and justice and unity and empathy for the oppressed, and with these very like liberal platitudes. And the problem is that they have no, you're in a period right now where the right is really able to have unity around, to create big movement to tear up like the liberal status quo. They have really the wind in their sail. And the left, rather than trying to like, draw a lesson from the failure of the past period and counter them with like, class struggle politics, really is really trying to build unity with like the scraps of liberal politics that are sort of dying, which is really, I think, that's at the root cause of all this infighting. They have zero political strategy to answer the big question. Like, for example, there was a big blow up 1 or 2 weeks ago. It sounds like old story now, but around the trans question. Yeah. Some people are Muslim and they're like, oh, trans, they should, spaces for women should be exclusionary for trans, they're Muslim, conservative. And then you have all the liberals who are like, expel these people, they're backward. And so how do you deal with the trans question in this, in this period? No one has a solution, really. Corbyn hasn't said anything. Zara Sultana has been more on the side of like, social backwardness has no place in the party. So nobody is able to put forward like a working class answer to this particular problem. Like anti-Zionism, should the party be anti-Zionist or not? How do you appeal? Yeah, how do you reach unity between Muslim people and like, more like urban progressive people? They can't do this on the politics of liberalism. Yeah. There's also the aspect of carrierism, which you can also, I'm sure you can talk about because you know this in and out this issue as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things to be said about bureaucratism, but I think fundamentally what we write in this article, right? Let's just talk about the front page article a little bit, because this is something you said as well when you're talking about the tasks of the left. Like, look, the working class overwhelmingly doesn't back the left, and the task of the left, if it's serious, it needs to win the workers. If it's not going to just, go into farther defeat and collapse, it needs to win the workers. So I think it's a question of how you do that. But I think the problem fundamentally is Jeremy Corbyn and Sultana, as you mentioned, this party, just like how Corbyn won became Labour leader, really he's kind of forced to do this because there's so much pressure underneath him, but there's no coherent set of politics. It's not as if they have like a clear working class program. It's a collection of platitudes. You got like Jeremy Corbyn's like peace, love, and justice project, and then Zara Sultana is like a little bit more like feisty, like anti-Zionist, I'm a socialist, like Rosa Luxemburg light program, like hobbled together with like the independent pro-Palestine MPs who, yes, it's good that they're pro-Palestine, but that doesn't make them socialists. Like,
they're not socialists. Like,
they're not. One of them was like for the military being called in on a strike or something like that.
Yeah, in Birmingham. Another one's a landlord and thinks that the party shouldn't scare like wealthy people. Like they're not like. Anyway,
right? So it's like you don't have a clear, unified working class program.
Yeah.
You obviously have elements of this, obviously at the base, right? There's absolutely good progressive aspirations at the base. People are pro-Palestine,
they're impulses,
anti-Zionist
aspirations. Yeah.
Right. Let's be clear. Like, these guys have careerist appetites. Like, Jeremy Corbyn is not above careerism.
No.
He doesn't want to be known as a great darling of the British left and end his career being the guy who like betrayed the Red Wall in England and sent all the working class to the Tories. He would like to have a last little fighting chance at redeeming his image. And, Sultana, she campaigned for the Starmer government even when that government was pro-genocide. How dare you do that and still call yourself a socialist? And, she had so many chances to fight against the Labour government and for her politics. But she continued ultimately propping up that government while making left-wing criticisms. And the thing that she chooses to resign on is this question of like disabled cuts to disability benefits.
I think it was the 2-child benefit cap, but
one of those two things, right?
One not of the like attack of Labour,
Like, of course, important, but not one of the questions that's really like going to galvanize a huge population in the country, you know? And so what she wants to do is, well, she knows that she was absolutely sidelined in the Labour Party. She lost the whip. So she's like, oh, well, what do I do next? You know, I have a career to pursue. She wants to be the next face of the British left. So she's like, okay, well, let's go and get together and let's hobble together this coalition, your party thing. And she called the question, you know, and she forced Corbyn's hand on this thing. But it like,
Yeah.
from day one, this was really a power struggle where you have different sort of forces driving these two sort of figures of these great leaders. You've got, you know, more of the trade union wing backing Corbyn because, I guess, right?
I mean, they're bureaucrats. I don't really know. It's
That's
not
the
very
other thing.
clear.
It's so
I think
secret.
so. I think you're right. I think there's a few more union bureaucrats who might be behind Corbyn, but I wouldn't say there's no bureaucrats behind Zara Sultana as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. I think the only point is like about bureaucratism. Why do we see it? And I think it's because so long as the politics are not based on a clear working class perspective, like on the interests of the working class, you know, they're not drawing any. What do I mean by that? Okay, you know, somebody else on the left can say, okay, well, we'll be for revolution. That's not what I mean. The politics are not drawing an explicit class line against the British ruling class. It's not anti-Zionist. It's not anti-NATO. You know, it still has like bridges to the liberal movement. Obviously, as you see with Zara Sultana's politics on, you know, identity politics, on the Green Party, and so on and so forth. Like, it's not actually willing to frontally confront the British ruling class. And I think that's fundamentally the problem. And if you're not doing that, you're hobbling together this coalition of, okay, you want the pro-Palestine Muslims. Okay, fine. You also want all the sort of LGBTQ plus people. Okay, fine. You want the ex-Labourites who are in their hearts Labourites. So therefore, they're not going to be very anti-NATO and all of those things. But you want to like lump these people together. Well, guess what? You can only do that if you're still conciliating the ruling class, you know? Because if you were to really draw that sharp line against the ruling class, then a lot of these elements, these pro-green, these pro-NATO elements would be driven out.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they're refusing to do. And that's why you see this bureaucratic like tussle over control and influence and money and the membership list and the blah, blah, blah.
That's how you see bureaucratism always, is to really push down and sort of seek to contain the revolutionary aspirations of the masses, you know, because what driving people in this party, yeah, it's anti-Zionism, opposition to imperialism, opposition to, you know, really the ruling class. Like, not to say that they're all communist or whatever, but like that's where their aspirations lead to. So you need to accommodate these aspirations, but at the same time, if you want to deal with the ruling class, you need to contain them. And this is where you get bureaucratism, really. And I think in terms of politics, what I was going to say is, in terms of Zara Sultana, I think her greatest mistake, and I think the mistake of many people in this party as well, including in the base, is to have like drawn no lessons from the past struggle, both from the period of Corbyn's leadership, but also the last few years, where really you see a growth of the right, a retreat of the left and the workers' movement, precisely because leaders of the left are tied to a wing of the ruling class. And she's unable to see how the ruling class has used progressive, so-called progressive ideology in order to advance its interests, and how she still embraces this on many ways, which inevitably ties her to the ruling class and inevitably pushes a lot of working people aside. And yeah, that's really this political lesson.
Yeah. So I guess let's start sort of bringing this to a close.
Yeah.
So look, 6 days, absolutely shaking the British left. We say that the task of communists, of the left, of the revolutionaries, whatever you want to call them, is to win the workers, right, in this period. And to do that, you need to make a fundamental break with liberal politics. That's really been what drove working people away and into the arms of the right. And obviously, in the concrete juncture of today, and the fact that your party seems to be on the verge of a split, you know, hopefully not. But what do you say to the left? What is the task of the left? How do you go forward from this? I mean, I just saw that RS21, this is getting a bit too British lefty right now, but, you know, a left organization, they just put out this post on Instagram, you know, big letters, your party, don't fuck this up. And I read it, and it's just really like,
it's not a good statement.
It's just appeals like, hey, don't mess this up. We need you. Be transparent. Blah, blah, blah. And it's
Get
like,
in a room and figure it out.
Yeah, so it's like, okay. And we, by the way, I've just gotten the message. We've just put out our leaflet, which we'll link in the show notes. It's called
Cool.
The Politics Behind the Shit Show. And I think what is your advice to leftists about what to do?
Well, I mean, it's tough, but like, I don't know if we like. I think the first thing is to really stop sugarcoating reality. That's the thing on the left. That's what everybody's been doing for years. Pretend everything's all right. Pretend every time there's a big setback, everybody says, "Oh, but this, so it's not too like no, okay." Things are really bad for the left. Like,
Mm-hmm.
anybody that sugarcoat the situation that says, "Oh, but the big Palestine demo, oh, but this or that," is really trying to prevent the necessary look in the mirror and reorientation that's so badly necessary. And I think drawing political lesson is really important in terms of like, everything we've talked about. And this is a point I made, but I'll repeat again, like what the left is doing is not working. What I've been doing for the last decade, that doesn't work. That must stop. There needs to be something else. And it's really because the left has been associated with liberalism and identity politics. It has alienated really huge section of the working class. So we need to break with this. That doesn't mean like that we stop defending minorities, trans people. No, not at all. But we must defend immigrants, minorities, trans people in a working class, in a with class struggle method, and with a working class program, not with a liberal one.
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, the only, you say like, oh, that doesn't mean we stop doing that. It's key. Your party must defend all those people. But I think the left needs to understand that the only way to defend those people, not just defend them, right? Because obviously the trans question sort of made this clear, the sort of controversy that happened recently. To build unity between the LGBTQ plus movement and the more socially conservative Muslim community, how are you going to do that? You must defend both of them, right? It's not as you got to pick sides between the two. That would be horrible. There's nothing socialist about that. You have to defend both of them, but how do you actually build a unity between the two? And I think that's a question that the left needs to answer.
Mm-hmm.
But you can only do that by actually pointing to the fact that you have to look, the right is on the rise. The government is doing miserably. And if you don't break with the government, the right is only going to keep growing because the left refuses to break with the government, right? Like it refuses to break with the politics, the liberal politics, the status quo. So I think it's to see this big picture and like how to fight reaction. And only by focusing on that common enemy will you build unity amongst these disparate, oppressed groups.
And you have to win workers to defend these minorities for their own interests, and not in a liberal manner, not like with love, or they don't even need to love these people. They just need to understand that you need to defend their rights, whether it is trans people, immigrants, minorities, defend their rights against the right in order to build that unity. But you can't do this on the basis of liberal appeals and liberal moralism. You're just going to, pit people more against each other. And I think lastly, in your party, whatever exists of it tomorrow, like hopefully, but really it's not to get sucked in these organizational, bureaucratic infighting. Both of these factions are bad. There's no side to take. Yeah. Fight for political clarity. The root cause of this problem is the absence of politics. And you see in these meetings of your party, because there's many meetings happening, and people are really avoiding the hard question. Let's talk about what unites us. Sweep the hard question under the rug. And no, we can't do this. We have actually to confront the hard question and have actual debates on the left. Mm-hmm. Debates. Yeah. Which there's very little, unfortunately. So that needs to change. And yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. On that note, I mean, we've kind of been speaking about this informally. I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. But, we thought in our discussions, we thought it would be a good idea to have a pre-conference communist conference, of the left to talk about what should be a working class, like a communist poll, a communist wing of your party. What would that look like? And, hello, if this is a wake-up call for the left, then let's get together. Let's get into a room and actually fight for how to prevent a disaster, another Corbyn debacle, and what to fight for in your party right now. The left, I'm just sort of checking social media as we speak, because everybody's like, what's happening in your party? What's happening? It's like, well, okay, let's talk about it. Let's read it. And as I said, I'm going to link the statement in our show notes. Yeah. And yes, let's talk about what's happening in the left. You need to understand the politics behind the shit show. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think we talked about a lot of things in there. Punchlines? How to wrap this up?
Well, I think the British left has a lot of, we have very tough years ahead. Again, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be tough, whether in Britain or in the West. The right is really the force that's dominant, and really the left is on the retreat, isolated from the working class. And we have to solidly prepare ourselves for this, for what's going to be tough. So that's why we have to be very honest about the situation as it is in order to really start reorienting and learn the lessons. Let's learn the lessons politically.
Let's. All right. On that note, like I said, Vincent, along with other comrades from the British group, they'll be doing regular videos, publishing regular commentary on your party. So do check out their YouTube account, Workers'
Hammer.
And on X and Instagram, Workers' Hammer, to get regular updates on what is happening in the country, but also, in this party and so on, because it is an interesting period in British politics as we wrap this up. So thank you very much for coming on the show and breaking down all these events. I think that's been very helpful. I hope that made sense to our listeners. I hope that wasn't too narrow.
I hope so too.
If it is, do get in touch. I think the other thing, sorry, now I'm like starting another topic, but the other thing we talked just about Britain, but we're talking about 6 days that shook the left in Britain. We just had the Charlie Kirk assassination across the Atlantic, and that is going to shake up the situations in a massive way. Trump has just sacked Jimmy Kimmel. The liberals are going hysterical. Trump is going to come after the left. It does not look good for the left. Whether you're in Britain, whether you're in the US, and in many other countries, it is not looking good. And the thing about the Kirk thing, it's very similar to, fundamentally it's the same question about like liberal identity politics and how they've really disarmed the left and really turned a lot of working people away. And Charlie Kirk, he was able to capitalize on this. And you watch some of his videos, it's really sad. It's sad how bad leftists are, or these liberals on campus are, in arguing with him. Like they have nothing to go on. And I think like that also is a sign to wake up and understand that these politics that have really driven the left on the questions of race and immigration and gender, all of these things, it has not gotten you anywhere. Anyways, I think our comrades in the US are working on something on Kirk, so we hope to bring you a show on Charlie Kirk and what that means, and how to actually answer some questions when it comes to Charlie Kirk, how to answer Charlie Kirk actually. So hopefully we'll have that for you in the coming days. So stay tuned. But yes, so I'll bring this back to a goodbye. Anyways, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.